Oh my God, it is happening. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the Moynihan Report, episode number 1. Why does this show exist? Why do we need another show like this? Because everyone else has gone completely insane. And on this show, we know who the good guys were in World War II. It was us. We know who killed JFK. It was Oswald. And, you know, it's been a bit of a crazy moment. And because it's a crazy moment, we have a sponsor that, you know, by the way, I don't do ad reads. If you've ever seen the shows, there's never an ad read. But this is not really an ad read because I support these guys and they're supporting up my favorite people on earth. The Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, used to be education. They're taking over for the ACLU and they're doing incredible stuff. And so fantastic are they that they're actually going to be on the first episode. We're going to have Fitzpatrick, who is a senior lawyer there, talking about the Mahmoud Khalil case. So who is guest number 1? About a month and a half ago, I ran into this guy and we had a bit of a spirited debate. And I remembered him in Congress, you know, yelling at Republicans and being loud. And we had a version of that. And I said, we have to recreate that. A 7-term congressman who's looking around this set like he's totally baffled. Anthony Weiner. Anthony, welcome.
I know I'm baffled, but they've committed enough to your show. They painted on the wall. They could have just.
We can get rid of it.
Oh, is it?
Yeah,
I was going to say. If it was a stencil, you'd say, we're not sure it's going to work out so great.
You think they trust me like that?
Sure.
Good Lord. They have buckets of paint waiting for us.
So this is the first episode. This is where you experiment with shit, then tear it up and come back in a couple of weeks with an actual show. There's like a soft opening.
You know, I always say to people, nobody watches the first episode of Seinfeld on purpose. They go to like the 3rd season. So we'll see.
You ever see the art of the early seasons of The Simpsons? I mean, the words are amazing, but the art is like...
This is the Tracy Ullman version of the show. And I spent like a couple of days watching all the interviews you've done in the past couple of years. And you were on Piers Morgan. I know it's incredible that you go on that show, but you're on Piers Morgan about a year and a half ago.
You've done 4 minutes of one episode.
I'm not saying. I just think it's a bit crazy, that show. They're just screaming at each other. I don't like the screaming, is what I'm saying.
American media in 2025.
To set a new standard, right? So on the show, you say, I was, asked for a second chance. I don't want to ask for a third chance. But you're kind of asking for a third chance now because you are running for city council.
Yeah.
What changed? Why did you decide to run for city council?
I don't know. What it came down to, frankly, by the way, thank you for having me on the show. All kidding aside, I'm a big fan of yours, and I hope this show's a big success. Look, I guess what it came down to some degree is that increasingly being a resident of New York City, being someone who, you didn't tell your audience this, I was on conservative radio, kind of being the designated...
With Curtis Sliwa, right?
Well, actually, he and I haven't done the show for a while. I had my own show. We call it The Middle, whatever it is. And talking to Trumpers, and I was fine. I was scratching the civic itch, whatever it is. But I think I reflected just being a citizen, living as a civilian in New York City, still caring a lot about my city. I wasn't terribly happy with what I was seeing going on. I felt that we were and so I began this process of kind of hunting around for people to run for an open city council seat in my district, and people would say, why don't you run? And I would give the answers. I had my chance. I did this job. I was a councilman back in the 90s, for Christ's sake.
Right? Yeah.
And after a while, the further I got down this, I didn't have a great answer for why I don't do it. Why? Because I did some embarrassing shit, and I'm in whatever it is, and I went to prison. Yeah, that's a reason. That's the reason I might not be successful, but that's not a reason I shouldn't try to help things. But what really kind of pushed me was the people that were running for this. And for those who are not New Yorkers or in your audience, it's like city council anywhere, except on steroids, in that you're running New York City. It's 170,000 people, enormous hundreds some odd.
Would you say it's more progressive than most city councils, or is it about?
Well, I was going to get to that. The people that are running were all from this certain contemporary firmament in New York City politics of basically frictionless, far left, kind of symbolism-based politics.
Sort of DSA type politics, right?
I would not say that necessarily, because that has its own brand in New York City, but basically not so much about, here's the thing I'm going to do to solve this problem.
Yeah.
Or let's hire new cops, or let's increase the sanitation collection, or let's put this business, let's figure out a way to manage it, whatever it is. More like, let's stand up and fight for our values-y kind of thing. And then in 2024, I know it's a long-ass answer, but in 2024, a lot of my neighbors in this very progressive city stayed home. Didn't vote for Trump. I mean, Trump gained a lot in New York City because the denominator had changed because of fewer Democrats turned out, and he got a few more votes. But I think I kind of see a broad discontent in my city, and some of it's because I don't think that we're really solving problems all that well in New York City, and I ran out of reasons not to say, all right, here's how I think we should do it, and as I did that, before I knew it, I was a candidate.
Well, look, as a politician, you know this, you don't talk to constituents when they say it feels unsafe and hit them with statistics. Because I see this quite often. Crime is down. I mean, look, people don't feel safe on the subways. You see this kind of explosion of homeless people, which is a mental health crisis. You know, I think deinstitutionalization was a big problem. We see that in New York City. We see people at the Roosevelt Hotel in Midtown who are migrants. That stuff really affects people. And when you say, well, you're wrong about, don't believe your two eyes, I'll give you a couple of numbers. It feels unsafe on the subway. I take it 3 times a day, 4 times a day.
I mean, look, here's where a certain gulf exists, is that I think that, yes, we do have, I consider it, I think much more a sense of disorder. Like our public spaces are kind of slightly out of control. And that's, we use our subways now to provide housing for people, mental services for people, and we forgot that for 99% of the city and for most of my neighbors, we use it as a way to get to work, to go to the garden. That's what we want it to be for. Here's the space that has emerged where I think I'm trying to fill. For a lot of Democrats in this city who only have to worry about primaries, I mean, that's the way it is, there's very little institutionally pushing them to take any risks at all around offending the status quo. Yeah. So how does it manifest? You gave the example of people who are on the streets who are not fit to care for themselves.
Sure.
The way it manifests, it's like the ACLU says they have a right to be there, and that's the end of the conversation. When we all know that the common conversation should be, how do we solve this problem of this person being on the street? We have a right to the public space, but we also want to care for that person. Yeah. And so those conversations don't seem to be happening. So, and I think it's an indictment a little bit of urban democratic politics, but you can argue that it's a problem we have in the country.
I mean, you see that shift in the last election. You know, it's prominent in some places, less so in others. Do you think that the electorate in New York City has become less progressive as they have seen certain social problems manifest in the city?
You see, I know there's the temptation to do this progressive moderate thing because it makes it very easy to understand New York City politics. You got Cuomo kind of running as a moderate.
Called the middle.
Yeah, but I'm saying that before I answer your question, let me just say that look, I don't believe, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't believe that when I get on the subway and pay $2.90 and then 3 guys jump in behind me, a progressive person in that situation turns out, oh, we're doing okay. I think progressive people find that unfair just as much as a person who might consider themselves conservative. I think the problem that we have is that people, Democrats, dyed in the wool, always going to vote Democrat, primary Democrats, by and large, believe that's unfair and we should try to figure out some way to fix this problem. And too many of the institutions and politicians that represent them are like, it seems that I don't really consider that a problem. I don't talk about it. I had 2 murders on my block on East 14th Street. I live in a nice neighborhood. 2 murders happened on East 14th Street. All of the politicians got together, put out a joint statement. They didn't mention adding some more cops, putting some more. And now they did ultimately put more cops on the beat there. And we haven't had murders there, thank God. I think that the progressive conservative thing is not just that I think that people of all Democratic stripe are saying we ain't getting the job done and we should be. We're not giving them really great reasons to vote for us is my bottom line.
You said that, you know, and this is a question that was asked of me. I mentioned to listeners to the podcast that I do that you were coming on, and someone asked a question and said, what do his voters think of him? And I said, well, how the hell would I know that? But I can ask Anthony that question, is that you said you have some things to overcome, you did some stupid shit, and that's gonna come up every time you interface with voters, I imagine, right? How do you deal with it?
No.
It doesn't actually come up.
It comes up,
yeah.
But look, here's the thing, here's what makes that question challenging to answer. First of all, everyone comes at it from a different direction. Most people, overwhelmingly most people, are not terribly interested in that stuff because in the interactions you're having with them, you're asking for their vote. Now, some people consider me disqualified, period. And they want to engage in no conversation. They want to shout at me from across the street. I have opponents who say they believe in hiring the formerly incarcerated, except if they're running against them for the job. But here's what I say, and the way I'm trying to deal with this is that one, anyone, you included, your audience members, who ask me a question about any of this in good faith, I'm there to try to talk it through, whether it's what I did and did not do, whether I accepted responsibility, which I did, whether I was dealing with addiction issues, which I was, whether I served time, accepted responsibility, served probation, left prison, and then went to work for a company that hired the formerly incarcerated. I'm not doing a Donald Trump or an Andrew Cuomo. I'm not saying the world was against me. I'm saying I accept responsibility. I was convicted of obscenity, no one's ever been charged for obscenity in the Southern District in forever. But all of it being said, I'm trying to do something different. I'm saying, yes, I'm an example of someone for whom the criminal justice system said, this is the debt you have to pay to society. I paid that debt. And now if people say, well, I want a little extra for me, I say, go fuck yourself. I'm not here for that. If you want to ask me how you can trust me, I never did anything to those voters. But it's a complicated question how they're responding to me. I'm trying to do something very hard here. One, I'm trying to overcome scandal that everyone knows about. Two, I'm trying to run as a very different candidate than the other candidates in a district that is not used to someone coming and saying, let's hire 3,000 more cops and put them on our street. Let's train them differently, but let's definitely put them on the street. And then the third thing I'm trying to do is I'm kind of coming back from a different age in politics where I'm visiting this new DSA progressive world and saying, hey, let me engage in this conversation with you a little bit. The combination of all those things makes this a very hard thing to do. I mean, this is going to be hard, but I'm very good at this.
You know, I mean, and it is a good faith question. I hope you understand that. But it is interesting to me that I am somebody that when something bad happens to me, and a lot of people know about it, I want to run away from it. I mean, you're saying people shout at you across the street. I mean, that would, for me, that would send me to Antarctica.
Well, but that's telling. I just want to, before you continue your point, they very rarely do to your face.
Of course not, yeah.
No, you say of course not, because fundamentally people are decent people too. Now, when they're walking away, and frequently what I try to do is say, pal, come back, let's talk about that, or like...
You do that? You actually engage them and say, come, let's have a chat.
Man, when you are doing what I'm trying to do now, which is encourage people to vote for you, to sign a petition, to get you on the ballot, that's the job. I'm literally knocking on people's doors, and you have that moment where they see you, they know exactly who you are, you don't know what you're gonna get. But to get to the question you're getting at, look, there is this notion of, is shame something that you put on yourself? Do you wear it? Or do you try to say, look, this is who I am here. And if I can be of some service by saying, look, people go through shit. And this is another thing I get on the streets a lot. People who say, I went through this. And sometimes it's not at all analogous to what I went through, but sometimes it's way worse. And I guess what I'm trying to say by standing up for is that why shouldn't people who go through things be able to stand up and say, here's what happened to me. And in the past, and when I was on the radio, if people wanted to call in and yell at me about this stuff, I would talk to them about it in that form too. I think it's part of it.
It's not that I believe that people can stand up and address these things, but in the situation that you're in, you're a politician, and you've been a politician most of your life. I mean, I saw this clip from with you and the execrable Lawrence O'Donnell, and you guys were yelling at each other. And he said, oh, you're a narcissist, you love being in politics, that's all you care about, kind of thing, and you guys went back and forth. And, you know, I'm looking at that clip now, and I cannot stand the guy, but it's like, you really have an addiction to politics. You're coming back to it. And the thing that I'm saying is that, yeah, you can address these things and say, I'm a changed man, I had addiction issues, but you're putting yourself in a situation where you have to address that much more than the average person.
Yeah, I guess so.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I guess so, but okay, a guy gets out of prison and he's a carpenter, and what he's really good at is carpentry. And I believe that our system should be that that guy comes out of work and you're gonna hire a carpenter, you hire that guy if he's good at his job. I don't, what I have kind of been good at, and I was very good on the radio, I'd be an excellent co-host for your show, by the way.
We'll see what happens.
I'll slip you my resume later. I am good at looking at problems, describing problems, coming up with solutions, and trying to argue with people who are dummies. Okay? I'm good at that stuff. Politics is pretty good for that place. And I want to say something else. If at the end of the day, I draw the conclusion, which I ultimately did, the city council in New York would be better if someone like me was in there fighting for the kind of notion of problem solving that we need to do, not just being we're going to have this protest after our session or whatever, or we're going to try to address the problems to make this city better. The argument seems to be that, well, you seem like you really want to be in politics, and therefore that's disqualifying, or at least I'm going to treat that as something resembling a liability.
I don't think of it that way. I just see that it is a profession, a vocation that opens you up to endless confrontations with things in the past that you might not want to confront all the time.
I believe the only way you go through shit is by going through shit. I mean, if people, and I want to tell you something just to reiterate, when I'm out there standing in front of Key Food on Avenue A, and people are coming up to me, they're talking about Trump, they're talking about the migrant problem, they're talking about stuff. Sometimes they'll say, "Hey, tell me a little bit about what you were going through in 2008, and
What do you tell them? Because you used a word that I was surprised that you used. You said you're an addict. Now, typically you associate that I'm a heroin addict, I'm a cocaine addict.
Yeah.
What kind of addict are you, and are you currently that addict?
So first of all, addiction runs in my family. I lost my brother to addiction. I mean, I have come to believe that if the characteristics of addiction are doing something and being unable to stop doing it, despite increasing pain and trouble in your life and being at a place that it's unmanageable, then my connection with interacting people who I haven't met in online things it takes a form of addiction. And to the extent that I can't do it without, whatever. Now, I'm in a program of recovery that we don't like to talk about a lot publicly, but I'm in a program of recovery that is the same 12-step scaffolding that other programs are. I'm not interested in persuading people that I do or don't have an addiction, or that they should believe it or not. But for my framework of how I maintain my stability and my sanity and my sobriety, I refer to it as an addiction.
Yeah, no, I mean, it makes a certain amount of sense because, I mean, somebody who, I don't know who these people are, maybe myself, who deals with certain addictions, I would love to do this thing that I'm not allowed to do, is that it's the constant battle, right? It's the thing, it's why friends of mine who are alcoholics are in AA 40 years later. And is that the same, because I don't know the type of addiction you're talking about, so is that the thing that you're constantly struggling with?
Well, when you say constantly struggling, I mean, there's a difference.
Constantly addressing it, I suppose, by going to meetings, right?
There is this notion of being a person in recovery.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess the analogy that I find is that if you have epilepsy, you have no control over having epilepsy. But if you're a diabetic, I've heard, you are not responsible for having that affliction. However, you are responsible for taking your medication. Yeah. You are responsible for maintaining it so that you don't pass out while you're driving in a car and do some harm. Mm-hmm. The same is true for all what I've been taught in all in all programs where you're dealing with addiction. That you're not just saying, I hope I don't drink, or I hope I don't take drugs, or I hope I don't do anything inappropriate online, but you have a scaffolding of recovery, and part of that is trying to be as rigorously honest as you can about it, not doing things in secret, obviously taking steps that you don't get into places and you go to meetings and you rely upon a more transparent lifestyle. So much of what I was doing, all of what I was doing, was in the privacy of my home, in secret and in shame. And so that's the way. So you say, am I constantly struggling?
Yeah.
No, but it is constantly there. I don't believe that people become former addicts. I believe they just become people that are in recovery.
Yeah. The Canadian media baron Conrad Black, do you remember him? He owned Chicago Sun-Times, The Telegraph. He was put in prison for a rather long time, and he came out, and it had this effect on him, which was quite interesting, because he was a rock-ribbed conservative, a real right-wing guy. And he came out and he said, the prisons in this country, because he's Canadian, had British citizenship, He's like, the prisons in this country are absolutely insane, and the criminal justice system is insane, and we are creating more criminals by housing them the way that we do. When you came out of prison, what was your takeaway? I mean, obviously you're a progressive guy, so you probably had similar opinions of that when you went in, but what did you take out of that as an experience? You said, oh, I didn't know that, 18 months ago.
Yeah, so a couple of things, and by the way, I do think that the Venn diagram of concerns that left and right have about the criminal justice system have overlapped, and I think that once we get past the fever dream of the Trump experience, here's the first thing, is when people say to me, when I say, listen, there's a lot of stuff that I was accused of doing that I didn't do, and just to make it very clear, I was charged with federal crime of transferring obscene material. You don't really have an option to go to trial. Not literally, but practically speaking. And the reason is that prosecutors who were not elected, these prosecutors have in the federal system, have the ability to say to you, sir, we have decided to charge you with crime A. However, crime A carries a 10-year mandatory minimum sentence. If you plead guilty, we will agree not to charge you with crime A, but to charge you with crime B, and we will only send you away for a range of 21 to 48 months, okay? Practically speaking, you're not gonna take, you're not gonna take the chance that you're gonna be away from your 6-year-old kid. So that's what happened to me. Now, and I don't want anything to be heard as not accepting responsibility, but for example, I pled to things and had to agree that I did things. There was no evidence that I had done, right? However, so the one thing when I got inside, the number of people, and I was not in a low security, I wasn't in a camp, I was in a medium security prison, I found no one that actually had a trial. So the notion that many of your viewers and listeners have that, okay, the check on the abuse of the prosecutor is that you've got a trial. That, no prosecutor wants to lose a trial. You've got 12 members of a jury. You're gonna, practically speaking, doesn't exist. So when you see the prosecutors have a conviction rate of 98%, it's not because 98% of the people are guilty. It's because it's called the trial penalty. People don't even try. And then once you're inside, you see again and again, and I was only in for 18 months and 5 days. I had a 21-month sentence. You see again and again.
It's a long time, though. It's a really long time.
Hell yeah, when you have a 6-year-old at home. You see time and time again guys who are doing 15-year bids who, if they had 5, it would have been, they would have totally, the penalty that they had paid for dealing drugs or from them finding pot on their field or whatever it was. I'm not saying there were not people inside who you looked at and said, this fucker should not be out on the street again. And there were some very dangerous people in there, and it's not a place but I would say that. And then the third element is, I'm not saying a little goes to trying to figure out a way to make this time that we have these men in there useful in some way to society, but zero. Nothing goes on there. There's no incentive built into the system. There's no way that wardens are measured by how many guys get out and don't recidivate. There's no effort it's just a waste. It's just a waste. And it's really expensive. The infrastructure involved is enormously expensive. So I learned all of those things. And ironically, I had been on the Judiciary Committee of the House of Representatives as a somewhat tough on crime kind of guy. But those experiences taught me that when someone says the system is unfair, and I got caught up in it, I have some empathy for that. I don't think January 6th or beat up a cop is in that category, but when someone says his prosecutor overstepped and I had no choice but to plead guilty, I feel for that person because practically speaking, I could not go to trial.
Yeah. You mentioned your son twice in just a pretty short answer about going to prison. What is it like being a father now? You say that people shout at you across the street. This is an albatross that you're going to be carrying around your neck for a long time. How does that affect your kind of job as a parent?
First of all, you're so down on my life.
I'm not down on your life. These are things that happen to you.
My man, I was also a member of the United States House of Representatives.
We're getting to that. We're getting to that.
No, but like the idea that people confront me on the street.
I'm a depressed guy. I gotta ask these questions.
Jesus Christ. I mean, look, man, I was for years a member of the United States Congress.
I know.
I'm a middle class. Let me finish my little riff here.
Terms.
Let me finish my little riff here.
I can complete the last one.
I was like a middle-class guy in Brooklyn whose mom was a school teacher, went to public schools, went to college, not at Harvard. Where'd you go?
UMass Amherst. Come on.
Oh, okay. I went to Plattsburgh.
Disappointment on that one.
Plattsburgh State, whatever it is.
UMass better.
Okay. And I wound up being in basically the major leagues of politics.
I'm very impressed.
I ran for mayor a couple of times. No, the point is when people experience me in New York City, are you in New York? Or I feel like I should have done more research for this show.
Yeah, I am.
So when people experiencing me on the street, for many of them, it was, I have a whole panoply of things that they remember me for. So for Jordan growing up as a kid, him walking with me is much more, I mean, every once in a while, someone will be like beefy with me, but much more it's, oh my God, my mother-in-law is in this country because you have to get her immigration papers, or this guy, my social security, or my God, you sent my son to West Point, or you voted for that thing, or you helped get 9/11 first responders thing. So he gets a lot of it. And one of the things about this moment, he's now 13, he now understands the internet, he now understands all these things, is that he kind of has this compressed version of famous dad and mom. His mom was also a famous person. And then something happened, and then I lost dad for 18 months, and now people still, but why? He is so used to people interacting with me on the street. So for him now, he's like, oh, this is that thing that they're always interacting with you about, the politics part. Like, this is you getting on the ballot. This is you saying what you stand for. This is someone coming up to you and saying you're wrong about something, and daddy standing there and arguing about it. So for him, this part of the process, one of the reasons I'm finding the running to be nourishing is that for him, he's seeing, going back to when I first ran in 1991, he's seeing the beginning of this process. So for him, he's kind of finding it kind of cool. I mean, he's 13, so he's blasé about everything, but he finds it pretty cool.
That's in a way what I mean, because for me, my daughter is 14, and I am obsessed with not sort of disappointing her, and her looking at me and being like, oh God, this guy. And that's, so my question of being a parent is how to kind of, balance these things when he's going to find things out.
Well, it's funny because for years I've been thinking about that. And so what I've tried to do is always talk to him in language that he can understand, which is hard to do. I mean, he's visiting me in prison. And also to be as honest about it as I can. So he knows when I go to a meeting. He knows when I'm making an amends. He knows when I'm doing these things. Now, he's 13, so he doesn't think anything about dad is cool. He doesn't think anything about, whatever. He's in his own space. He's being an adolescent. You've read all the books, like I'm sure I have. It's not about me, it's about him and his social circle 100%. But all of that, but if I'm gonna model what it looks like to get up off the mat when shit happens, that when people say you're amazing, I wanna take a selfie with you, to keep that right-sized, that when you walk by someone in the street who's struggling, to understand what that's about. All of this is part of parenting in a complex thing, but I'm trying to be of service with it.
Let's talk about the modern political scene, which is making everyone a bit crazy at the moment. And let's talk about your party. I mean, Democratic Party it seems to be kind of quiet on a lot of these. Do you think the party is kind of standing back as the Republican Party scores a series of own goals? And I see conservatives constantly attacking the Trump administration on due process stuff, on these deportations. I mean, Democrats are kind of quiet at the moment. You don't think so?
Well, they're powerless.
Powerless, but you got to get back to power. You got to be kind of loud about it.
It seems like they're Chuck Schumer if they're quiet. I don't know if they're quiet. I mean, I do think, look,
there's a lot of pressure on Chuck Schumer to go away too.
You can probably find a pretty good panel that we can line up here, 5 or 6 people who take the position, everything from we should self-immolate on the floor of the House of Representatives during the State of the Union to we should let them do their CR and watch Trump go down to his 30% and go us into a recession, and then Republicans take 20 years to get back into power. And in that continuum, there's like, but remember, like, the Republicans chased this bus. They caught it. They've now got their Project 25. They got their guy. They're acquiescing to, they're giving up their institutional prerogatives as members of Congress to let the president do these things. The judiciary, after saying that the president is not responsible for committing criminal acts while he's in office, is now wondering why he's thumbing the nose at them. I'm not 100% sure as you should be staring at the Democrats and saying, we're supposed to be acting like the minority. It's the Republicans who are running this situation. And the burden is the burden should be on them to say, wait a minute, what are you doing to live up to what I thought were Republican values, at least around the Constitution and the institutions that it represents? Are we doing a great job? No, but you can argue that even a great job. Look, we just had this conversation in microcosm about the Chuck Schumer keeping the government open or not. And I, as much as you may quibble about how much outrage he showed and how old he might be and that he announced it in the New York Times and not on TikTok, the fact is, few people have said to me he was wrong about the idea that we had two bad options: continue the government in a shitty way, or shut the government down and let the OMB guy who wrote Project 25 decide how we reopen it. Those are bad options, right? I don't think much that the Democrats would do would change those two being the options. Now, you want to say you don't hold up a paddle with silly expressions on them? By the way, you know what my idea was for the State of the Union? No. I try to get my former colleague to do this. When Trump was talking, I said what they should all do, since we're going to get thrown out if they protest, they should all do bullshit. That's what I would have done.
This is the modern Joe Wilson. You lie.
Yeah, but he would have got thrown out because he can't say you lie. Yeah. I would just do the high school version of sneezing and saying bullshit.
This is the man, East Village, that you want on the city council. Totally. But where should the party be now, though? Because this is the thing. I mean, at the beginning of the Biden administration, Biden runs as somebody who's essentially the non-kind of lefty candidate. I'm a centrist guy. I've been around here for a long time. You know, a lot of that DEI stuff is day one with Biden. And there's some people that are mainstream Democrats who are quite pissed about this. There's a backlash, right? Trump is part of that backlash. If you look at David Shor's numbers the other day of the number of people who voted for Hillary in 2016 to 2024 for Trump, that movement was zero amongst white people and quite big amongst minority voters. Do you think that that's a reaction to, I mean, it has to be a reaction to Democratic policies, but what is it actually? Is it that the country became too progressive? Was it that there was an idea after George Floyd that every time you opened up Amazon, they were pushing a sort of ideological position on you?
I think the Republicans did a better job than I expected on weaponizing these issues. It wasn't Democrats so much. I mean, at least it hasn't been for a while, Democrats talking about DEI and woke and transgender. It was people like Ron DeSantis thinking that his ticket to success in the in the Republican primaries was to be, this is the place that woke goes, and focusing on and pointing out some book of a school district I never heard of. They did a better job making that case, and we didn't do a great job answering it. Here's my theory of the case, and you know, when you're talking about a one-point election, and we do this in our line of work, is that, you know, someone wins an election by 1.5 points, and we're all trying to figure out who to give credit for the brilliant campaign. Then when you lose by 1.5 points and everyone's an idiot. I think that what Donald Trump represents is, for a lot of Americans, and I see this campaigning every day, like it's been a while since I've been out there, for most Americans, they're not watching shows like this and thinking with the left side of their brain what policy things they believe in and what, you know, how do you solve this problem or that problem. They focus on politics very little. They're frustrated about the way the world is going, about the way that their wealth is diminishing and everyone else is getting wealthy. They don't think that anything's on the level. And it becomes like a guttural scream. And I think it's even more so for people in communities of color who are like, nobody's listening to us. Donald Trump pisses everybody off. All right, I'll give a try also. I think we sometimes try to fit into a neat box a policy answer or a strategic tactical answer for why people stay home, like I think a lot of Democrats did, why people move a couple of points into. I mean, I can tell you this. When I campaign in my district, I have a lot of public housing in my district, some of the poorest New Yorkers. They're pissed off about crime because they see a lot of crime. I have a candidate in the race I'm running in, and his whole professional life, he's been trying to stop people from being evicted from their apartments. In public housing, one drug dealer in one apartment, in one building, the entire building is not safe. Yeah. The entire building is kept up all night. The entire building has and so I think for people like that, they want someone to say, no, let's evict the bad guy. I still believe in a woman's right to choose. I don't give a shit about a transgender this or a transgender that. I want to be able to get to work safely, and sometimes the Republicans do a successful job at saying, you know what, Democrats don't care about that shit.
Look, I think that's a very good point, particularly when it comes to minority voters in your districts in the past and where you're running right now, is that there's always this presumption amongst kind of upper middle class liberals that their ideas about race are held by the people that they are saying that they're protecting. I mean, the crack in powder cocaine disparity was pushed by the Congressional Black Caucus because they said, look, you guys are doing nothing. Crack is ravaging our neighborhoods. Yeah. We got to do something about it. There's a great book about this called The Black Silent Majority that points out that all this stuff in the 70s was pushed by local activists who were like, our neighborhoods are going to shit. But doesn't that also say the Democrats have failed on this? And we're going to try Trump. Democrats in major cities, this not getting, I talked to a guy in Chicago, said the same thing to me. He said, how long have we had Democrats in Chicago? They haven't done shit for me. Yeah. And so he said he's going to vote for Trump.
Look, there is this certain, and there's the other thing about Trump, and we're seeing it played out as he tries to govern this way. I was for a few years I've been a talk show host on a conservative radio station. We take calls in, and the calls are some of them are very interesting and erudite, but some are just the guy at the end of the bar saying, if we got rid of all the foreign aid, this country would be better off, whatever it is. To some degree, I do believe that people are in a mode that when you say they're blowing up the whole federal government, that some people are like, well, that's so bad. I'm not so sure that's a bad thing. And that is a real failing in this moment of this protest and outrage. It's outrageous that they're tearing down USAID. Really? A lot of Americans don't even understand what that all means. And when I was in Congress, I joined forces with a Republican to try to eliminate funding for the United States Institute of Peace. It's a giant think tank right next to the State Department, where we have the State Department. It was theoretically the Institute of Peace. So I do think Democrats have not done a great job with that. But getting to your previous point about the way we as educated white guys think very often about people of color I remember when first getting into politics in the 1980s, and I would go to meetings on behalf of Chuck Schumer. He was my predecessor, and I worked for him early in my political life. And the death penalty was a very big resident issue in the late 70s and the early 80s. Some of the most fervent pro-death penalty people were in these communities where we claimed we were standing up because a lot of disproportionately black men were being put to death because they're the victims of crime, and they don't want to be, they don't want performance, they want make us safe. So I think what Democratic voters may want now is the idea we don't necessarily want crazy solutions, but we want a fairly moderate solutions, but to be angry like we are. Yeah. And that's what I'm kind of trying to do.
Have you become more moderate?
Again, with the moderate.
You just said moderate. You literally just said moderate.
No, I know.
They want moderate solutions. You point at yourself. I say it to you, get mad at me.
All right,
okay.
You're right.
Did I win that one? Is that okay? Point to me. Go ahead.
Have I become more moderate?
Yes.
No. I mean, I don't know how you measure this stuff. I was a pro-death penalty guy. I'm not anymore. My singular thing when I was in Congress was I was trying to expand. No, well, before that, I was trying to expand the cops program to get federal government to pay for more cops, because crime was a big problem when I came into politics. I mean, much bigger than it is today, by the way. Yeah. I mean, and I was, 9/11 first responders, but I was very hawkish on Israel. That's another thing gets me. That's the trouble a little bit in this district. It's a very progressive district, we have protests. We have protests at Cooper Union where they're holding Jewish kids in the libraries because they're wearing kippah. I guess what I would say is that I am perfect what New York City is. New York City Democratic voters are people that are pro-choice. They don't kick. They don't try to exploit the differences in people, and they don't punch down when it comes to people who are different from them. But we're also people that like safety. We're also people that reward politicians that are going to make the city more livable. I campaigned when I first ran for mayor and did very well on a tax cut for the middle class, paid for by a surcharge on billionaires. I was running against Mike Bloomberg at the time. And I also said eliminate 5% of the government every year in waste. So are those like progressive, whatever it is?
It's a moderate position, I think.
Is.
It balances out. Yeah.
I'm really good at this, man.
Yeah.
I know what people think about. I know what they talk about. I know what is a winning formula. If Joe Biden listened to my radio show for the last 2 years and could speak.
But wait, but you're not saying that you kind of change your politics when you're running because you have the pulse of the city. I mean, these are things
I'm a New Yorker.
These views.
I'm a New Yorker through and through. So when you say, where am I on the spectrum? I'm basically the mainstream New York Democratic voter. In that, whenever we have races between people who are more extreme, more whatever lefty and more righty, the moderate candidates win. The Ed Koch's win. The Anthony Weiners tend to win.
Yeah. We have time here for. Should we go to talk to people? Do you want to do that?
What is that about?
What? Do you remember when you said you had that radio show and you'd have people at the end of the bar?
But how do you do it here?
Yeah, we just pop them up on the screen.
Oh, beautiful. What is this? Are we on a giant Zoom call?
We're on a giant Zoom call, basically.
Oh, really?
Well, that's an element of it, Anthony. We like to, it's very democratic.
Is there a 7-second delay?
No, there is not a 7-second delay.
That would be not on brand for you.
No. We just tell them to fuck off if they're no good. Well, we got someone up already. I was gonna go to. Are we ready now? We good? Who is it? I can't see your name. I'm blind from this distance. Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Sherry Jacobs.
Hi, Sherry Jacobs.
Yeah. So thank you for putting the spotlight on me. I don't feel any pressure at all. But
Don't. You have a question for Anthony Weiner?
yeah, I do. So a couple things. Listening to you, you talk about personal responsibility in terms of the crimes that you've been convicted of. But I wonder, and then you also talked about criminals in New York City and the problems with crime there. And you also talk about sort of like democratic views of criminals, which is to sort of have empathy. So I have a question of how do you bridge that gap? Because there's a lot of people, some of that problem in prosecuting crime is due to sort of like a toxic empathy that has prevented policies that are actually effective from being used. The other thing is, can you get past?
I'm going to answer that question
even
first.
into office?
Three positions there. How do you square those? She says that those are contradictory in some way.
I'm not sure I understood. So there's laws against all kinds of stuff, and people get prosecuted for those all the time, and some of the lowest crime rates we've ever had in New York City and in the country have been under Democrats. So I'm not really sure I see.
I think maybe, and tell me if I'm wrong about this, that you say that we should have empathy for people who serve their time, et cetera, but then also have a tough on crime kind of attitude. Am I wrong in saying that's kind of what you said?
Oh, well, people who have served their time have done their time. That's a very different thing. That's someone who was convicted and went to prison. We say you owe a debt to society and they paid it. That's very different than I'm not going to prosecute someone because I feel bad for them or that crime, the guy that shoplifted 25 times, we're not going to prosecute him because we feel that he had a tough upbringing. No, the people that go through the system, if we're Democrats, if we're Republicans, if our belief is in the criminal justice system the way we've constructed it, which is you have a chance to defend yourself. If you're found guilty, society says you've got a debt to pay. The question then becomes, when the debt is paid, is it paid? Or do you still have to then pay some additional debt beyond that? My view is Democrats and Republicans should all agree that if you pay your debt to society and you get out and you want to return to society, that's the way it should work. It doesn't go on forever. You do not owe a debt to society forever unless we want to start to construct a criminal justice system that says that for crimes, you get punished forever and we just keep you in prison forever, which Democrat and Republican both have agreed in even conservative places like Texas is not the way to go.
Well, thank you for the question. I hope that was a satisfactory answer. It was for me. I'm not saying I disagree. I agree with everything you say.
I kind of misunderstood the question.
No, you didn't. Jason, do we got somebody else? That's producer Jason. So when I started yelling about Jason, that's what I'm talking about. We got somebody else up there?
This is the way when you mocked up the show, this was what you were going to do. You were going to yell at some guy, and he was going to say,
look, he's on the beach.
Someone would pop up on the screen,
Correct.
and you'd squint at and say, who is that?
Yes.
Really, this is the way you worked it out?
Yeah,
All right, well done.
I'm going to ask you to leave in a second, but go ahead. Man on the beach, I can't see your name, but...
It's an artificial beach. I'm in Naples, Florida. Congressman Weiner, I admire you for taking responsibility for your crimes. I think that's admirable. I wonder if you also take responsibility for helping elect Donald Trump in 2016. As I recall, it was because your emails were found on your wife's laptop that we had the October surprise. So, with all due respect, do you feel a responsibility for that, for shifting some votes away from Hillary and to Trump?
Yeah, that's so I've heard this crazy butterfly effect theory of this before. First of all, let me just say this. You could blame me. You can blame John Podesta for having, password 1 is his password on his emails that led to a lot of this.
True.
You can argue it was James Comey. They had my laptop for a month and a half, and they knew what was on it. And they knew that what was on it was a duplicate of something that Huma had. So they had it for months. Somehow Rudy Giuliani and people at the FBI said that there was stuff on there and said it's going to come out any day now, and it comes out 10 days before. You can blame me. You can blame Hillary for not going to Wisconsin as much as maybe she should have done. Look, you can make the argument, but all I was the tool that was used by whoever the Trump administration found that there were active efforts by the Russians to influence the election in favor of Donald Trump. But yes, I was a person who did have a laptop. I will stipulate to that.
But it wasn't nothing. I mean, he's not asking a totally crazy question.
No, it's why it was one. It was actually nothing.
It was nothing. So the laptop had nothing to do with Comey reopening that investigation?
No, okay. If Comey wanted to continue to do what he did, holding press conferences about his investigation as the head of the FBI, not the head of the Justice Department, holding press conferences, saying I don't like what Hillary did, not bringing charges, opening up investigations. The fact that it was me it's basically, you can say, well, I was the thing that he used, but he was acting in this crazy anti-constitutional erratic way for months. You could say that the fact that he held that press conference in July saying that Hillary Clinton was irresponsible with state secrets was my laptop didn't have anything on it. There was an Inspector General report that looked at the whole thing, so there was never anything on Anthony Weiner's laptop. They knew the moment they looked at it that this was a duplicate of stuff they already had. So you can say, well, they used it as an excuse. Don't you feel responsibility for that? No, they could have used fucking anything, and they did. They did all kinds of nefarious stuff to say, you can do it. You can do it. It's weird that I don't see as much going on the internet about John Podesta, or his emails became public because he was a victim of a fairly superficial fishing expedition. Now, I get it. People want to have a narrative thing that explains why Donald Trump, and like Weiner, he's a villain, let's add this to the case, but it doesn't hold up. If anyone wants to, by the way, the Inspector General of the Justice Department did a whole look at this question of what the hell happened with the laptop? What the hell happened with the emails? What the hell happened with Comey? Who do we blame for all of that? What do we learn from it? You can go get it online, and it comes to the conclusion that for weeks and weeks they knew that there was nothing of value on Anthony Weiner's laptop. There wasn't 10 days before. There wasn't 2 months before. It was just a complete red herring, but it was used by James Comey. If you want to blame someone, if you want to find the butterfly's wings who kept flapping and flapping and flapping until they caused the election, you got to point to James Comey.
You Democrats.
I think there's plenty of blame, including John Podesta. But you provided some ammunition. Unintentionally provided some ammunition to James Comey.
There was nothing ultimately used except my name. There was no ammunition that was used.
I
You
wasn't there.
remember?
Maybe I recall correct. Wasn't it your wife's laptop that they seized because they thought you had used it, and then they found some additional emails on her laptop that they thought
No, well, let
maybe
me
I
just,
remember it
if
correctly,
we're
but
going
that's
to
how I
do this, and
remember
I
it.
appreciate my best regards to Naples. No, it was my laptop. This is back in the days of Blackberries. Huma plugged, backed up her BlackBerry onto my laptop, okay? So a whole bunch of her emails, right? But these were not State Department emails, they weren't private emails, and there were emails she had already turned over the BlackBerry to the Justice Department months ago. They go in to look as part of my investigation. So I got a bunch of Hillary Clinton emails. They look at them, they say, yeah, we got these already. End of story. Then weeks go by, and there's all kinds of innuendo going on online for Rudy Giuliani and Roger Stone saying, oh, Anthony, there's something that's going to come out, something that's going to come out. They open the investigation to only say, oh, yeah, we already had these, close the investigation 48 hours later. And you say, oh, Weiner. There wasn't anything there. There never was.
Thanks for the question.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And
Thank you.
we have time for one more, Jason? Is that what we're good on time for one more? Yeah, one more. I guess, Anthony's just getting a bit agitated now, so it's probably good. Yes, he can't even drink his water. He's so upset. Who do we have next?
Is this what's going on live? Is this poor gentleman? No. Oh, thank God. No.
This poor gentleman who's sitting there being, this is the technology bit we have to figure out. So, it's the first show. What are you looking at me like that for?
I'm just saying, do a dry run, man.
What's that?
Do a little dry run, like say, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna hold up this.
Yeah, but I don't know. Okay, go ahead. All right, I can't say. Who are you? Give me your background.
Hi. My name is Haley. I am a born and raised New Yorker who doesn't live in New York anymore, unfortunately. But I wanted to just switch gears because Anthony, you mentioned about Israel and how the districts that you are running in are kind of a little bit progressive. So I basically just wanted to ask as like a feel, because I haven't been back to New York for a few years. So I just wanted to know, like, how is, besides the protests that we see and besides like that, percentage that will always believe what they believe, what is like the vibe that you're getting on like just how, want to say, anti-Semitic New York has become? Because obviously we know how many Jews live there. So I just want to like see like what your vibe is and how the issue is being handled in New York City.
It's a very good question.
What do you think do you think that, and I think the last bit of that's important to pay attention to, do you think that in New York City or in New York has become more anti-Semitic? Do you feel less comfortable? You see people with Hezbollah flags in Union Square?
Here's what has happened, and it's not a new thing, but I'm seeing it much more acutely. On the left and the right, we have an anti-Semitism and an Israel problem. On the left and the right. That is worse than it's been any time that I've been in public life. Now, does it reflect where actual regular New York voters are? I'm gambling that it doesn't. I'm gambling that most people, when they see these rallies in Tompkins Square, in Union Square Park or in Washington Square Park with people literally waving Hamas flags. I mean, it's a little bit mind-boggling.
Yeah, I've seen it.
It's a little bit mind-boggling.
Yeah.
I think that most New Yorkers kind of are cringing at that. But the thing that I wrestle with, and I guess this goes to Haley's question, is that, is this a reflection of more people feel comfortable saying stuff they always kind of felt, or is this on the rise? I don't know the answer to the question, but I do know that a very important fabric of our country is getting rended here, in that it used to be left and right kind of did have a thing around Israel and around anti-Semitism that we both, we didn't kind of fight about it, that stuff. That did not have a partisan divide. And whether it be Bibi speaking before Congress back in the Obama days, or whether it be just politicians kind of realizing they could use it as a wedge, whatever it is, it's really not good. Now, when I'm out on the street and I'm knocking doors, it doesn't come up a heck of a lot. Just the other day, someone at Key Food said to me, he said, tell me about your policy. I said, tell me what issues are important to you. He says, Gaza. And I said, well, I'm a Zionist who believes in a two-state solution. He threw my flyer down and stormed it. I don't know, to be honest. I don't know. I find
If you told that same person you were a Zionist and you were in support of a two-state solution in a week before October 7th, do you think the same thing would have happened?
Question.
The answer is I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, it's had an unfortunately catalyzing effect on some of these people who might have been a Chomsky kind of lefty, and they've gone to very radical positions on these things.
I don't know. Look, I mean, here's the fundamental problem we have on the left. We can talk about the right also, but the fundamental problem on the left is that over time, the supporters of the Palestinians have come to the position that they're supporting the David against the Goliath, and for the most of the history of the state of Israel and the history that I came up with, it was the other way around. I'm a Democrat. I support the David against the Goliath. I support the one country who's at war with the 22 states in her region who declared war on her the moment that she declared her existence. So it's a little bit difficult for me to get. But then there's this other problem we have, and it's true. There are a lot of idiots on the left who just don't know what the fuck they're talking about. Yeah. When you tell them that the river to the sea that's the slogan of Hamas, and when they say that, they mean that no Jews can live, can live. A lot of them, and this is a cliche, but a lot of them really couldn't tell you what river and what sea. So, and some of it is also protests happen, and we haven't talked about the Khalil case, whatever it is, but protests on campuses don't bother me. Even guys that say dumb things, Did
it get out of hand at Columbia, though? I mean, Hamilton Hall, and I mean, you mentioned Cooper Union.
I think it got out of hand a lot of places. Yeah. And one thing that I think that progressives have lost sight on, who support these kids, who support these protests, is that with speech rights come responsibilities, and one of those responsibilities is respecting the right of other people to speak and other people to feel safe. And that, again, is a progressive, lefty, whatever you want to say, value that I think we've kind of lost sight of. But in the way Haley put the question is like, how is it out there? I still think regular New Yorkers are like, we support Israel, we're not anti-Semitic, we like the diversity, whatever it is. We don't like these kids wearing the mask and everything else. Yeah. That's my vibe. That's my sense of the vibe.
I mean, as a non-Jew, I can say this, but this is just a presumption. But I've seen people, a lone person on a subway, wearing, an Israel shirt or an IDF shirt, and I say, "Oh my God, that's really brave." And then I see an entire car full of people with keffiyehs on, and I don't even notice. So I think that, I don't know if I'm just presuming that that's like a brave.
Here's a funny thing. So I very rarely wear jackets and suits anymore. I'm over it. But but all the suits I do have, they have a little crossed Israeli flag and a U.S. flag. And I can't take it off. I can't take those off when I take the suit out of the closet. So the other day, I'm like, I'm not gonna be that guy who takes it off because I feel like. And for the first time in New York City, walking around, I was maybe it's because I'm a candidate for office and I'm like, okay, what votes am I getting with this and what votes am I losing with this? But I did have the same sense that you experienced. Like, man, I feel a little bit like I wonder who looks at this and says, I want to beef with that guy. But yeah, that's different than it was when I was in politics 10 or 15 years ago.
All right, final question.
Justin, is an anecdote. I work at the local JCC because I live here in Dallas and I am Jewish and everything. I get picked up in an Uber and they ask, like, what is this place? I don't know what to tell them. I don't know, it's a very conflicting thing. Like, they're interested to know, like, where they're picking me up from. And I don't know what to tell them if I work at the local JCC. It's scary.
Tell them it's a highlight court or something. Just don't. The JCC might not be.
The other thing about that.
I'm a coward. Have we not determined that yet?
The other thing about that, your run-of-the-mill Uber driver who's just trying to get through his day and trying to earn a living for his family is probably not an asshole. I mean, he's probably. I mean, I'm not saying that he doesn't have his political views. I'm saying that to some degree, we have to remember that the people who are being mean to each other, being anti-Semitic and being vicious to one another, I like to think don't represent a great center of gravity in our country.
Yeah, I think that what it provokes, by the way, is not necessarily violence or anything like that, but just a really annoying conversation, which I don't want to have when I'm coming from the airport about, the Balfour Declaration or something. All right, Anthony Weiner, guest number 1.
Thank you.
Did you have fun? Did
Are
have a good
you
time?
gonna? I look forward to coming back to your 1-year anniversary
Yeah, sure.
when you're having a fancy cocktail
it's gonna
party
be in
at
a
the
different
Olive
place.
Garden
Yeah,
or
yeah,
something
sure,
like
yeah,
that.
yeah.
And I'm going to tell the story about what a mess the first show was.
What are you talking about? Just people, we couldn't get the first person up. Unbelievable.
I don't know. You're doing it.
Unbelievable. I want him to lose, and I want the people of the East Village to get a different representative who might be a member of the DSA, and they might want to collectivize the grain in the East Village. I don't give a shit as long as it's not him. Anthony Weiner, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, pal.
I appreciate it. All right, when we come back, Connor Fitzpatrick from our sponsor Fire will be on to talk about Mahmoud Khalil, the Columbia College student who has been arrested and has been threatened with deportation and is really driving a wedge between free speech people that we're talking about free speech quite a bit in the past 4 years, but in a kind of different tone now. So they've stepped up to defend, and we're going to get the skinny on that. So we're going to be right back very shortly. Don't go anywhere. All right. Thanks to Anthony Weiner for that, even though he was giving me a hard time. Everything's great. Everything's fantastic. All right. So Connor Fitzpatrick is a senior lawyer, senior attorney, I think, at Fire. I know Connor. I don't know him personally, but I know his work. And just to come back to the fact that this episode and some future episodes will be sponsored by Fire, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, no longer education, but they do that too. Connor Fitzpatrick, thanks for joining us, and tell me about the Mahmoud Khalil case. I mean, I have a number of people that I know who are themselves self-identified as free speech warriors who say that this case is different, and they enumerate a number of things that they say makes it different. I saw Newt Gingrich today writing a piece about this. What do you make of the argument that this is by the book and this should happen?
So it's not by the book, and it shouldn't happen, and I'll get into a few reasons why. But first, for anybody who doesn't know, I'll give a quick kind of 20,000-foot view of what's going on. Mahmoud Khalil is a graduate student at Columbia University. He was heavily involved in many of the protests on campus, many of the pro-Palestine protests on Columbia University's campus. On the night of March 8th, ICE agents showed up to his house unannounced, arrested him, transported him in the middle of the night, first to New Jersey and then down to Louisiana. Now, when we hear pro-Palestine protests in university, it's very easy to conjure up an idea in our mind of what that involves, because we've all seen the TV footage of barricaded buildings, of people being blocked from going to class. But what's very different and concerning about the Khalil case is that the administration is not, at least as of now, alleging that he did any of that as a basis for his deportation. Instead, what the administration is doing is pointing to his pro-Palestine, or Secretary Rubio alleges, pro-Hamas views as a basis to eject him from the country. And so there's been quite a lot of media coverage about this, quite a lot of disagreement, very little of it nuanced, but I'll try to give a little bit of taste of nuance here and try to explain why this isn't by the book and why it's so concerning for free speech. So there's two kind of related questions that are going on here, right? The first is, do non-citizens have a right to free speech? And then the second, and I think equally important question is, should they? So on the first question, there's this sort of assumption that a lot of people have of non-citizens just simply don't have a right to free speech. Well, that's wrong. That's just, as a matter of law, it's wrong. There is a 1945 Supreme Court case on the issue. It's called Bridges versus Wixon. And it held that resident aliens are entitled to the right to freedom of speech. That is the law of the land, and it has been since 1945. Now, what the Supreme Court hasn't directly addressed, admittedly, and this is where some are arguing that there's a little bit of gray area in the law, is that, well, the Supreme Court has never actually addressed the question of whether a non-resident alien can be deported for speech that is otherwise protected by the First Amendment. They sometimes concede, oh, sure, we can't throw him in jail, but we can deport him because our power over immigrants in this country is so strong that we can throw you out if we don't like what you have to say. And that gets us, even if you believe that the legal ground is a little bit fuzzy, and Fire filed a brief today explaining why we believe it's not. I'm a little bit biased because I wrote it, but I think it's a pretty good brief, and I would encourage you to read it. But even if you think that it's a fuzzy question, I'd like to at least make a pitch of why you should believe that non-citizens should have the freedom of speech. And I'll give you an example. Imagine if, and as a little bit of background, what Secretary Rubio is relying on is a provision of the immigration law that allows the Secretary of State to personally determine that somebody is a threat to America's foreign policy and deport them. It requires no showing of a crime, no showing of an immigration violation, just the Secretary of State having a hunch that I reckon you're dangerous to our foreign policy, out you go. Here's why that's dangerous. Imagine if in 2007, the George W. Bush administration had tried to deport John Oliver for criticizing the Iraq War, saying that all of these commentaries you're doing on The Daily Show is really hurting morale and support for the troops, so out you go. Or imagine if just last year, Joe Biden had tried to deport Nigel Farage for attending the Republican National Convention. Presumably, to most, if not all viewers, one or hopefully both of those examples are unacceptable. And the reason for that, and I think as Americans, we kind of have a core, innate love of freedom of speech, is that that's just not how we operate here. Imagine if you had a friend visiting from another country and he or she decided to join you at dinner. And they asked you, hey, am I allowed to say what I really think about this person? I think everybody here would almost chuckle and say with a bit of a sense of pride, well, of course you can say what you think. It's America. Everybody's entitled to their opinion. So the idea that right now we're in a spot where somebody can be deported, not because they've committed a crime or they've otherwise committed a deportable violation of the immigration statute, but because the administration doesn't like what they have to say, doesn't like their opinions, that's very, very dangerous. And what we've been seeing with Mr. Khalil's case is that the divisions on whether folks believe he should be deported or not are very, very political. There's the few tried and true free speech warriors that we can count on when the going gets tough. But right now, there's a whole lot of motivated reasoning where people who believe his views are abhorrent are reflexively saying non-citizens don't have rights, out you go. And folks who are more sympathetic are rushing to his defense. Of course, at Fire, we're nonpartisan. Everyone's mad at us all the time, but that's because we defend everyone regardless of what their views are.
And Connor, I'm not wrong in saying that these cases are kind of compounding now, aren't they? I mean, I saw one the other day, and I think somebody at Brown University in Providence who had a picture of like a pro-terrorist picture on her phone. I don't know exactly what that meant, and then was later reported to have attended Hassan Nasrallah's funeral in Lebanon, the former leader of Hezbollah. And she is being unceremoniously booted from the country. Are those cases similar? I mean, you're seeing a lot more of them. I can't kind of keep up with them at the moment.
And I think that's a very good point. There are a lot to try and keep up with right now. And one of the things that we're very careful not to do at Fire is we don't want to outkick our coverage. Immigration law is very complex. And what we want to make sure is, at least based on the information that's being provided by the government in terms of why they are trying to deport someone, what we're looking for is, are they relying just on protected speech, or is there potentially a legitimate basis to deport or exclude them from the country? So let's be very, very clear. There is no First Amendment protection for vandalizing a campus. There is no First Amendment protection for occupying a building and trespassing. There is no First Amendment protection for blocking Jewish students or Palestinian students from going to class. None of that is protected by the First Amendment. So what we're talking about here is spreading ideas that make some people feel incredibly angry, feel very offended, sometimes feel unsafe, but maybe it doesn't actually rise to the level of harassment. And so if what we're talking about is just speech, it's just talk, then there is no reason that the usual protections of the First Amendment shouldn't apply, because the alternative is a very scary place to be. The alternative is allowing the government of the day, whichever party that may be, to deport any non-citizen who voices an opinion contrary to what that administration sees as their foreign policy. And that's a very un-American approach to free speech.
Connor, we've kept you a little bit. Do you have a moment to stick around and answer a few questions? I mean, it's important, I think, to me because, you know, I have had people in my universe fighting like cats and dogs about this. None of them are attorneys, but they pretend to be, and they're screaming at each other and saying, no, this is not a free speech case. And I imagine some of our viewers would have similar disagreements. Do you have a minute to maybe answer a few questions?
Sure.
Do we have anyone? Not yet? Okay. Should we just, no?
Well, we're just kind of letting them know for the first time. So.
Oh, we're letting them know for the first time? Okay. You know, we just do this thing as...
I just assumed my arguments were so compelling, nobody had a thing to say about them.
You know, Connor, I thought the same thing. I said he's a good Irish American who believes in free speech, and he's silenced them all. But we have someone now. Go ahead, introduce yourself. This is the thing. They're always muted.
There you go. Hey, Michael, it's Andrew Wimsett. Hey, the question I had, Connor, do you think the administration is trying to set some sort of precedent by going this route?
Yes. And I'll give you a couple of reasons why we think that. First is they've said so. So that's a good, that's one of the main reasons we think it. I believe both Secretary of State Rubio, President Trump, and Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt have all said in some form or another, this is going to be the first of many. And one thing I would urge everyone who's interested in free speech to be on the lookout for is often, and we see this around the world, when a government tries to institute a new crackdown on free speech, usually the first time they do it, they pick one of the least sympathetic examples possible to try and gin up support for them using the authority. But then once that bottle is cracked open, the government tends to use it and the government tends to abuse it. And that's why it's important to defend the right to freedom of speech, even for people that you don't like. So many people love to say that they defend free speech. In fact, I would venture to say that if you ask most Americans if they support free speech, you'd probably get 80 or 90% saying, absolutely, I support freedom of speech. But what we look out for, and I think what everybody should look out for kind of in their own heart and in their own thinking, is what if the speaker were voicing the opposite view? Would I still hold the same opinion about whether this should or shouldn't be protected? It's how we screen cases at fire to make sure we're not letting any of our politics, which range from the left to the very right. It's how we make sure we're being neutral when it comes to our case selection. And frankly, it's how I try to make sure I'm approaching my own cases and my own litigation in a neutral way. Of, let's say the message were the exact polar opposite of this, would my arguments be exactly the same?
Right. I was just thinking if another presidential administration was in power, what they could use this precedent to in ways that people wouldn't like anyway. So,
absolutely. Imagine for those who are on the right of the aisle, imagine if in 2020 or in 2021, the Biden administration tried to have everyone who accused China of creating COVID in a lab deported. I would think most folks on the right side of the aisle would deem that unacceptable. So once you crack open the bottle of government censorship, there's not a soul on either side of the aisle that's going to want to keep it closed because they'll think that their censorship is justified and righteous.
Well, thank you very much. I know you have some more hands raised now, so
thank you.
I'll go to the next
Andrew.
one.
Yeah, we'll take one more. We've got some hands up now. Who are we going to now? Who do we got?
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yep, can hear you. Introduce yourself.
I'm Jen.
Hi, Jen. What's your question?
I actually wanted to say that he actually did have a good enough argument to sort of change my mind. I was.
So you changed your mind. What was your position 10 minutes ago?
So I don't necessarily want to share space with people that have certain opinions, but it's not. That shouldn't be allowed to happen. They shouldn't be allowed to be kicked out of the country just for having an opinion. I was wondering go ahead.
No, go ahead. Finish.
I was just wondering if this might not even be a good question for you, but how much power can Trump actually get away with it, with kicking these people? Like, how much power do they have to actually be able to follow through?
Let me
that's actually a very good and very pertinent.
A similar question and sharpen it a little bit in the sense that, you know, there's an enormous amount of concern that we're on the precipice of a constitutional crisis because the administration has indicated that it's going to ignore judicial warning rulings that it doesn't like, and a lot of people saying we need to, like particularly Elon Musk, saying we have to impeach activist judges. What counts as an activist judge is anyone's guess. So, you know, what of it? What is the Trump administration? What can they do, and what can they get away with on this front?
Sure. So, Jen, very, very good question, and actually one that many lawyers are asking as well. So, a couple thoughts there. One is, both because I'm a nerd and because I'm a lawyer who likes to sleep at night, I try to look at things through the lens of history. And calls to impeach judges who make rulings that people don't like aren't new. Folks might remember during and I read about this. I don't look quite that young. Folks might remember during the Nixon administration, there was an attempt to impeach Justice Douglas for his order attempting to block the bombing of Cambodia. And so it's not exactly a new thing for folks to call for judges to be impeached. Now, with respect to the second part of your question of, you know, can this actually be pushed back against? Yes. And the way we know that is, so far, the administration has tried to deport two people. One is a student from Georgetown, and the other is Mr. Khalil, based on, from what we know so far, to be only protected speech. And so far, federal courts have enjoined both of those deportations. One was the Southern District of New York, now the District of New Jersey, for Mr. Khalil. And the other, and this is breaking news from about an hour ago, is the Eastern District of Virginia has enjoined the deportation of the Georgetown student. So I certainly have heard, like many others have, the voices from the peanut gallery arguing that the Trump administration should start ignoring court orders. So far, on all the issues related to this, they're respecting the court orders. They have not, so far as we know, deported anyone who a court has ordered not to be deported. But certainly it's concerning rhetoric. One thing that we often find both in litigation and in politics is that the party newly in power discovers that they actually don't like national injunctions, despite the fact that when they were out of power, they loved nationwide injunctions because it served as a check on the party that they don't like. And then, like clockwork, every January 20th, when there's a change in power, all of a sudden the parties switch on whether nationwide injunctions are good or bad and whether court orders should or shouldn't be followed if we agree with them. So what I would say to you, and frankly what I say to myself to make sure I can, go to bed at night, is until we see outright defiance of a court order, of we understand that the court has ordered us to do X, we're simply not going to do it, and there isn't really a legal justification for it, they're just sort of thumbing their nose at it, I would say, it kind of try to keep those concerns at bay.
Thank you.
Conor Fitzpatrick, thank you very much. And I want to thank all of you too for joining us. Conor is, of course, a senior attorney at FIRE, and FIRE is one of my favorite places. I've been, enjoying their stuff, speaking at their events for many years now, and that's why they're a sponsor, for no other reason but because we love them. And if you want to know what they're doing and some updates, you go to the FIRE, or FIRE or the FIRE? Is it the FIRE? Connor?
I think it's still thefire.org, but I know my communications team will be very mad at me if I got that wrong, because that's how people donate.
Yeah, thefire.org/Moynihan. Go do that / because then they know that you get it here, and I get all sorts of prizes and free sneakers and the rest of it. But this show is off and it is in the air, and we will be back on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 4 p.m. live. And then Tuesday, I'm just going to give you a little preview. You got to come back for this one. We're mixing it up, and we have the author Laura Delano, who has a new book out about SSRIs, depression, and the pharmaceutical treatment of depression. And there was an article about here in the New York Times. Go read it if you don't go and read her book, because it was so contentious that they closed down the comments because people were, acting like lunatics. So go read that, come back on Tuesday, and Laura will be here, and we'll be talking to her. And you guys, of course, can chime in on the next episode of the Moynihan Report. Thanks.